Now that we discussed the airbrushes, let's look at how they're put together. This is the 100 LG gravity feed. And when you get it, it will have a little cap on the top of the color cup. And it will also have a protective cap over the tip, which you have to remove before you can spray. The other components with the brush is, this is the tip, this is the handle back here, your trigger, and your stem in which your hose is attached. You don't want to disassemble an airbrush completely for cleaning. You only want to clean those areas in an airbrush in which the paint goes. In this case, the paint goes into the color cup at the top, drips down into the airbrush, and sprays out the tip. So those are the only areas that really get dripped with paint. There's no need to disassemble the entire brush to clean those, nor do you ever want to immerse the entire airbrush in fluids for cleaning. You simply put some cleaning agent into the appropriate cleaning agent into the color cup and spray it out through the brush for color changes. Or at the end of the workday, or periodically through the workday, you would flush out the airbrush with your appropriate cleaning agent and then remove the needle and clean that. The needle is housed underneath the handle. All internal mix airbrushes have needles that run through them. This is the end of the needle. This is the needle. This is the needle chuck screw. It's the screw that holds the needle in place. To remove the needle from the airbrush, you simply loosen the needle chuck screw and then pull out the needle, and you can wipe it clean. And then you slide it back in nice and easy until it's snug to the front, and then reset the needle chuck screw. Let me show you. As you pull back on the trigger, see how the needle comes back? That's what controls the spray of the airbrush. The further the needle is away from the tip of the airbrush, the more paint comes out. So when you pull way back, a lot of paint comes out. When you pull back just a touch, a little bit of paint comes out. That's the dual action gravity feed 100 series brush. Another dual action brush is the 150. It doesn't have a color cup on the top. It has a jar that attaches to the bottom, this jar right here. Has the same exact components in it that the LG does, only you would fill this jar with your appropriate cleaner and spray it through the airbrush. Now, one of the things that you want to watch out for when you're using a dual action airbrush is that when you remove the needle from it, it frees up the trigger and allows it to be removed. You can take the trigger right out once the needle's out of it. And you'll see, I'll have to put my glasses on for this as the time goes by here, it gets harder to see things. You can see here this little return mechanism that is behind the trigger, right, which pushes the trigger forward to that shut-off position when you release your finger from it. Once the trigger is out, that will drop forward. All right. It also might have the tendency of dropping out. And if it does, it's easy to put back in place. And this is what it looks like, this little part here. All right. When you put the back lever in, you want to really pull back on the spring mechanism in the back of the brush here. So you release the pressure. Then hold the little back lever, curve side forward, and drop it into that slot. Once you have it in the slot, you can lay it over to one side so it'll stay there. Then I can release the pressure of the spring, and the back lever stays right in place. That allows my hand free to put the trigger back in place right over top of the little plunger. Put that in there. All right, and then release the mechanism, and it's all set to go. Now, to keep it in place, you have to replace the needle. We'll slide that right back in there. Make sure that the trigger's down properly so the needle slides through, nice and snug to the front, and then you would retighten the needle chuck screw. That way, when you pull back, it pulls back on the needle. Now, here's something to look out for. If you forget to tighten the needle chuck screw and you put the handle back on and you're wondering why the airbrush doesn't spray, it's because it's sliding over top of the needle and not pulling it away from the tip of the airbrush. So you want to make sure that's down nice and snug. And put back your handle. When the airbrush comes to you, the 150 model, it has a little screw in the front of the stanchion, in front of the trigger. That screw is normally screwed all the way back when you receive it, and that keeps the needle from riding against the front of the airbrush in shipping. If you were to start spraying right away with that screw back against your trigger, you would automatically get paint coming out of the airbrush. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that that's unscrewed before you start spraying, and that way when you press down on the trigger, nothing comes out of the airbrush but air, and that's where you would start. So in the maintenance of the airbrushes, you don't want to disassemble them too much. You don't want to immerse them in a fluid because you'll ruin the seals that are inside. You only want to clean them out where the paint goes, in the color cup, out the tip. Right? And you don't want to lend them to a friend because they'll never come back working. All right? Next, I'll discuss the materials that you use in the airbrush. You can spray virtually any type of paint that's available, from automotive paints to ceramic glazes to hobbyist paints to artist acrylics. The problem with spraying the paints for the airbrush is that they have to be reduced down to the consistency of milk or below. So if you buy a paint and it's thick, you have to be able to thin it down to a flowable consistency. And that consistency has to be down there like milk or ink in that general area. Badger manufactures 3 types of paint that are already thinned down and ready to be sprayed. They're Aeropeg, they're Model Flex, and they're Airtex. Each one has a particular application. Let me talk about the Aeropegs first. The Aeropegs are a copolymer vinyl paint that's designed for artists and illustrators or decorative painters. It's pre-reduced, as I said. It's water-soluble, dries water-resistant, low in toxicity, easy to spray, intermixable, and an ideal paint for the painter, illustrator, and craftsperson. You just pour them into the top of the airbrush or into the jar and spray them. Real easy to work with. Another type of paint that they have is the Airtex. Airtex, very similar to the Aeropegs, but they're designed for textiles and for working on fabric. They spray easy, they're pre-reduced, all set to go. You just put them in the airbrush and work on your textiles. We're doing t-shirts and neckerchiefs or whatever it may be. They dry waterproof, but they need to be heat set for permanency. And it's very important that you heat set them properly. I would use an iron, set the iron on a cotton setting, and then iron over top of the garment. Make sure you don't iron directly on the paint. Put a piece of brown paper or something, or turn the textile over and iron the back of that so you heat set it, and that way you can wash it and the paint won't wash out. Really a neat paint to work with. The next one is the Model Flex. It's more of a hobbyist paint. Stick to just about any surface that you work on, but it is a very durable paint to work with, and it has hundreds of colors. It's just incredible how many colors this comes in. And it also comes in sets designed for the particular application. And this is the Model Flex rolling stock set. Badger makes a variety of sets for different applications, and you can work on virtually any surface. Remember, you can paint on metal, you can paint on wood, you can paint on plastics, and you also can paint on illustration board and paper. Badger makes an excellent paper for airbrush technique. It's called Bright White. It comes hot and cold press. It's 145-pound weight, has an extremely white surface, and it's very, very durable. It will hold up to repeated masking of Frisket films and self-adhering stencils. So don't be afraid. You can paint on anything with an airbrush as long as the material you're spraying is compatible with the surface that you're working on.